Hello and welcome to my cake kitchen. My name is Gladys, and over here I make simple, informative tutorials to help you navigate cake decorating easily. I also organize baking sessions live where we undertake a particular bake with a goal in mind, and then we come back and assess the results of our bake. So, these cakes you see here were baked in an immediate live session. I'll link it up somewhere or leave it in the description box. It's actually live. I think we did that in the last hour or so, and we broke the live so that I could take a break and then come back so we can see the results live. The reason why I do that is so that you have a feel of your time invested, so you can see the results of the baking process and all the tips that had been handed and see in real time what the results are. That's the essence of this live. I understand I can undertake a whole live session and then pre-bake some cakes and then introduce them, but that takes away from the feel and authenticity of the process and results that I want to introduce to this channel. So if you've just chanced onto this channel, hello and welcome. I hope you find some value in this video, but just so you know, this is a continuation of a previous live session that's up, so check that out for the full context. But in summary, I had an original cake recipe, which is a vanilla cake recipe that I have adapted over the years, and it's a great cake. However, I had a couple come for a consultation and a cake tasting session, and even though it went great, their feedback was that they would have preferred the cake a little bit tender and light textured. So, because of that, I thought if I can adapt the recipe to suit their preferences, great. Then I have other alternatives for people or clients who may have the same preference. So the intention was then to pick the original cake recipe, make some quick changes to it, and see if we were going to get a result that was a result that matched our goals. And the goal here was to bake a lightly textured cake that is still great tasting. So as a result, I swapped a few ingredients around. I have talked you through every decision I've made concerning the ingredient selection in the previous video, so do check that out. But the main feature of the ingredient selection is cake flour. I had cake flour, parts of cake flour in the flour mixture, flour combination, which was some parts of self-raising flour. In the UK here, self-raising flour is generally plain flour with rising agents in it, and which then means I do not have to add any leavening into the flour. I prefer that for my cakes so that it eliminates the responsibility of having to add leavening, because depending on what recipe you're looking at online, sometimes the leavening that is required may not work out as you would. And in the past, I don't know what's wrong with me. My leavening never works the way I want it, even with the accurate measurements. So I ended up swapping for um, self-raising flour, which has given me the best result. So for the original recipe, besides a little tweak in some of the ingredient quantities, which I have listed in the previous video in the description box, the main thing was that we swapped some parts of the self-raising flour for cake flour. Now, what is very important to note about cake flour is that cake flour in the UK, unbleached cake flour, has a low protein in it. So low protein means you're going to have less gluten, which means it will result in a tender, lighter, fluffier cake. But a few things will affect that result. But the gist of having a cake flour in your cake is that you start with less protein, which means that you are hopefully going to derive a better, a lighter, lightly textured crumb compared to the use of, say, plain flour or self-raising flour. That said, I in the previous video, I did say I could have opted for substituting the entire quantity with cake flour. I am still developing this recipe. So the result we're seeing here is first time for me and first time for anyone who's chanced onto this channel. The only difference here is that we broke the live and then we took a break whilst the cake was baking. So the live is not too long-winded. But on the subject of long-winded, I'm going to take a break from talking about what happened in the live video so that we can test this result and observe it. So what did we do? Besides tweaking the ingredients and substituted largely parts of the self-raising flour with cake flour, we also made sure that the oven, it was baking at a lower temperature, because the original recipe bakes at about 165 or 170 degrees C, and over here I reduced it to 160 degrees C, which is 10 degrees less than the original recipe. In the oven also, I put a bowl of water in a heat-proof glass bowl, oven bowl in the oven on the base, so that it cools down the temperature of the oven. So whilst the cake is baking, it doesn't cook the cakes vigorously. I explained in the other live video that my oven has hot spots and can tend to be a little bit too hot. So I was looking to kind of slow that down slightly and make sure there is a more even bake, which also guarantees like a light, a tender bake and doesn't crust too much. So that was something I did. The good news is that this cake's baked exactly an hour. I set the time between 55 minutes to an hour. The 55 minutes being it's the lower end of the timing, and then 1 hour 15 minutes is the higher end. I find that with baking, it's never a particular time. So you leave a window of opportunity for things to develop. At 55 minutes, if you open the oven, you're not going to ruin your cake. But at 1 hour or 1 hour 15 minutes, you're guaranteed that the cake would have risen and settled enough so that even if you do open it, it doesn't fall. But at 55 minutes also, if you check your oven and you figure that the cake is not cooked enough, you still have up to about 20 minutes to make adaptations to guarantee the results you're aiming for. So that was the intention for setting the time between 55 minutes to an hour, generally as a guide. However, I set my alarm for exactly an hour. I think the bake time started about 12:34 and exactly 1:35 we were done. So I took the cakes out, let them set, and what is the time now? It's 12 minutes past 2. So the cakes have been sitting out since 35 minutes past 1. I didn't want to do anything to it except putting a skewer in it to test for the fact that it was all cooked. So these are the things we did to derive the results we are trying to look at over here. So I'm going to take the cakes out now. These are 5-inch tins baking 4-inch deep. So these are completely 4-inch deep tins. Wow. Okay. The difficulty with baking cakes deep is that you want to be careful, because if you don't optimize your recipe greatly, the rise won't happen as you would like it, and you're likely to have difficulty with getting great results. Sometimes it can overrise and sometimes it can fall. So I have done this enough to know that, okay, I just wanted to get at least a lovely top. It hasn't burnt or crusted badly, and there is a sort of soft texture to this. I realized that even though I wanted a lightly textured, delicate crumb to this cake, which is what I am adapting this particular recipe for, I did say in the other live that I realized I could have chosen a completely different course for my outcome, i.e., I could have chosen a different recipe, employed a different technique, that is, use the sponge cake method where the eggs will be beaten with the egg whites and all of that. But the goal was always to stick with what I know and make adaptations so it is easy and adaptable for all my processes. I'll tell you why. Because more so, structure was important to me. Because most of my cakes end up being tiered, and this is going to be a wedding cake. Whilst I want to settle the preferences of the client, I also want to make sure that the cake is optimized optimized for better structure. Because if the cake is not structured well in terms of its crumb integrity, you set up the cake, and even with the best intention and best structures in place, such as the use of dowels, the cake is likely to collapse. It doesn't hold properly. It also doesn't hold properly. So with all of that to consider, which is because this cake is going to be built into a 3-tiered cake for this couple, it's important that the structure of the cake will support the outcome of the cake itself when it is built and set up. So I didn't want to opt for the sponge mixing process. Also, the sponge mixing process is very, very technical. I was concerned that making it in large quantities was going to be time wasting for me and was going to not guarantee me my best results. The third reason was also that for me, my cakes have always been creamed, except for I think my chocolate cake recipe. So for that reason, I'm like, trying a whole new recipe means that I am undertaking a whole new entire process that I have to study and learn, and that was going to take me in too much time because I am tight on time. I needed to develop this recipe as quickly as I could, adapt it as best as possible, let the couple taste it, and then we'll come back and then begin to design the cake for them because time is out of my hands. So as a result, I thought the best thing was to start with what I know, which is use my entire process, the creaming method, and make slight adaptations to the cake and the ingredient selection and see how they affect outcome. So like I said, the major thing in this ingredient selection was the use of cake flour. But other than that, part of the cake flour and the self-raising flour, I added 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. And like I said earlier, I normally don't like to add leavening to my cake. So adding leavening was a new thing. I also reduced the amount of moisture elements that I add, which is milk, to enhance the moisture of the cake. The original recipe has about 110 to 120 mils. I reduced this by the 20 mils so that we had 100 mils of milk, but then we kept the eggs a little higher than we normally would, because the original quantity of eggs would have been 275 grams, except for this quantity I had 290, which is 15 grams more than the original recipe. What happens is that the 15 grams of eggs, which will add moisture to the cake, then balances out the reduction in milk here, which means that the elements of moisture is not completely reduced, but it's substituted in different forms. So I had to kind of think through what adjustment I had to make. Over here also, I reduced the margarine by 25 grams so that we can have less oil in there. It doesn't make a great difference, but if you have to think through why you are aiming for a certain result, then you can optimize for the results better. And that is exactly what I did. So for more on the process, if you thought this live is too detailed and subject focused, you want to check the other live, because I did exactly the same thing, because it's important for me that you are well informed about the process, you understand your ingredient selection, you understand how they interact with each other, because that is going to be helpful for you to troubleshoot issues when they arise on a bake day. Because trust me, when you look on my channel, the ton of beautiful cakes that you see is only a snapshot of an entire process that has seen cakes fall apart, that has seen midnight cake testing, a varied range of options, and different sorts of things to be able to guarantee the outcome. So trust me, cake making is not just flour, sugar, and eggs whipped together. Cake making is an art form and a science that one has to study with an open mind. Having said that, our cake is baked here, and I'm going to try and cut through it so we can see what it tastes like. Unfortunately, I'm trying to think what other way I could have done this for us to get a different view. I don't know. If you know, leave me your comments in the comment section. We want to have a look at it. I like the crusty bits of a cake. You know what? There is a taste to this cake that I'm loving, but I don't know if that's my bias. I don't know. So obviously, we've looked at the outside of the cake, which isn't dry. There is like some softness to it. When I put the barbecue skewer in it, it was cooked all the way through. But the only way we'll know what the crumb looks like is to cut through it. So I found it. So the cake is baked. Let's be positive, or let's assess what we were aiming for. The cake has baked well, baked in record good time. It has a soft touch to it. It has a delicate crumb on the top. It has a lovely flavor. So let's cut through it and see. So we're cutting a freshly baked cake. Let's see what the crumble looks like. In the previous video, I also said, whatever you do, a home-baked cake from scratch is never going to be the same as a cake that is bakery made with cake mix or cake box. Wow, the crumb here is really, really tender and super soft here. Now, what I don't know is it because the cake is warm and it will feel different when the crumb is settled? I don't know. I just like the texture of this crumb better. I do. So let's level this again. Yeah. I like the crumb better. And when you squish it, I don't know how to explain it. When I've baked the original recipe, when you squish the cake, there is a tightness to it. And when you look at the cross section here, you will almost feel like there is a dense deposit of moisture in there. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe I'm going to have to save this. I don't know. I don't want to overpromise here, but I noticed that it is slightly different. Now I wonder what it would be like if I were to bake this cake or recipe with completely the cake flour. It's really, really nice, and it's there is a sort of softness that makes it feel very cushiony. I just don't know how to explain it, but this is really good. What I don't know is whether this is lightly textured enough for the couple. I won't know until they have tried it. But I also wonder that because this cake is freshly baked, this is about an hour out. It's been baked an hour now, so it's still warm. To get the best observation for what a cake is likely to feel and look like, you probably want to leave it to set for 24 hours, which is probably what I am going to do with this particular one here. So I'm going to leave this wrapped in a cling film and then leave it to set on the countertop. And what I'll do is that I will create a shorts based on my observation on this one, and then I will link it back onto this video. Hopefully that should give you a sort of balanced view. But otherwise, it has such a nice flavor to it, because in the past when I baked, I feel like the cake, when it comes out fresh from the oven, is slightly eggy, but it eventually settles, whereas this isn't. So I'm going to have to leave both. Now that I've cut this, I'm going to take some notes of my observation here, and I'm going to leave the other one to settle, and then we'll see by morning, 24 hours from now, what the crumb looks like. Because once the cake cools down and the crumb begins to set, which is what is advisable anyway, if you're a new baker and you're starting to bake, it's not advisable to set your cake up fresh or build your cake from fresh, because when the cake is fresh. Besides this being warm, which of course you should leave your cakes to cool, the crumb is not settled. So it can be pretty delicate and it can fall apart if you're not careful, especially if you're going to be carving or trimming the cake. It's all right if you kind of set it in the fridge for the crumb to chill set before you stack it, but advisably avoid stacking your cakes from fresh. A good tip is to either leave the cakes to settle wrapped in cling film on a countertop for 24 hours to settle the crumb, so the crumb is firm. It doesn't mean it will become dense, it just means that it's settled and chilled enough for you to work with. Another thing you can do is wrap it warm as is and then freeze it. I know there's a whole thing about freezing cakes, but there's a science to freezing cakes that will enhance moisture and flavor of your cakes like none other. So you want to try that. But if you want to freeze your cakes, you want to also be cognizant of the environment within which the cake is stored, because when cakes are frozen or refrigerated, they tend to absorb the smells of the environment within which they are kept. So say if your freezer has strong smelling substances or food elements in there, it might just ruin the flavor of the cakes. So if you don't have a dedicated fridge for baking, you want to make sure that at least your environment is free from any strong smelling substances or foods in the fridge over there. And I think that is one of the key things that is likely to enhance or affect the storage of cakes. But that said, I'm just going to leave this on the countertop, because if I freeze it, I am optimizing for a completely different outcome over there, because then the crumb is different, moisture is deeply enhanced. I just want to be able to observe this at its base level when it's left to the side. And then we'll probably be back with some more testing sessions.